Hello and welcome back to our next panel, which is on design and construction. Hope you enjoyed our first two sessions, our keynote and that really fascinating session on digitalisation. So on now to our next leaders debate. The government's second road investment strategy period from 2020 to 2025 is to press ahead with a £27 billion programme of road building over the next 5 years, which will pay for work on over 20 connections to ports and airports, over 100 junctions and 4,000 miles of road. However, the Department for Transport and National Highways have stated that there is little headroom due to £11.5 billion of work, which is years behind schedule. So what will the impact to RIS3 if delays continue? Designing a resilient road network takes a delicate balance between demand and impacts to the environment. Roads must be built for the long term and must be cost effective. Questions such as will the road ease congestion or will it improve safety are at the forefront of the minds of planners. Now, the building of new roads and networks is a complex venture and has its own set of challenges compared to the upkeep of an existing network or reformatting the network to make way for pedestrian or cycle-only zones. So how do authorities choose the right option, not only for the environment and budget, but also for the community? To explore this topic, understand the challenges and how visions and strategies can lead to realisation so that leaders can make those decisions swiftly and with peace of mind that the decision is the correct one. We're joined by two brilliant speakers. We have Dorothy Joyce, who is Programme Manager at Highways and Transport Improvement Programme, which is with the Department for Transport. And we also have Kevin Hicks, who is Director of Highways for Manchester City Council. Welcome to you both. And just to say, we're really interested in putting your questions to our panellists. In our previous session, if you had joined us there, I had a slight glitch on my computer, so I wasn't seeing your questions, but it's all been sorted now. So please do put your questions to our panelists, and you can do that using the Q&A function on your screen, and I will keep an eagle eye on those questions. Also, if you want to carry on the discussion outside of the virtual room into LinkedIn or Twitter, we do have a hashtag which is PSE-365. Dorothy and Kevin, welcome to you both. And I just thought it'd be great, because I know you have both so much experience, just to get a sense of, you know, what you're doing now, but also a little bit about what you've done up until this point around design and construction. So Kevin, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Geeta said, I'm Kevin Hicks. I'm the fairly recently appointed Director of Highways at Manchester City Council. Previous to that, and going back on some of the background and history, that's been largely for the last 15 years with Birmingham City Council as the head of highways there, and previous to that, the traffic manager with the city. So those sort of big urban city challenges is what I've been used to. You know, everything from first time building of a city centre interchange for public transport in the city, the introduction of the trams on Corporation Street through the city, and the extension now out through Broad Street, Paradise Circus, and out to the Five Ways interchange at the Ring Road. The changes to Grand Central Station, New Street Station as it's better known, sort of 5-10 years ago, that were made. Again, all things are heavily involved in, as well as then the more mundane stuff like having to do maintenance and management of the tunnels through Birmingham City Centre on the A38, and doing block closure of those for 2 summers in say again about 5 or 10 years ago. So sort of quite a background of both delivering on the major project side of things. Also got a big scheme in Birmingham that I headed up there, which is a major structural piece of structural refurbishment work on what's called Tame Valley. Locals will know that as the A38 Aston Expressway, which is a £94 million government funded scheme to strengthen that structure as well, which is one of Birmingham's roads. So yeah, big on project delivery in those sort of heavy urban areas, but also about service delivery of those more day-to-day stuff, management, control of the network, and maintenance of the network and asset management. Very similar to the role I've taken on at Manchester, and as I was just discussing with Dorothy, with slightly different challenges, but very much the same solutions at the core of them. So.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. And Dorothy, what about you?
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick correction. I'm actually with Liverpool City Council, not the DFT. I have worked for the DFT, but I'm now here at Liverpool, who are undertaking a quite in-depth improvement programme for their highways and transportation, which has been not quite as well managed over recent years as it might have been. I'm not a career engineer or highways person. I've been around the transport arena for 15 years now, but only highways in specifically for about 5. But I've had to cut my teeth on some fairly difficult and complex programs like the A14 in Cambridgeshire, which I had to adopt when I worked at Cambridgeshire there. So, and there are massive undertakings here in Liverpool with a highways improvement programme, with an active travel programme, with an EV charging programme, all of which need to be and complement each other in a cohesive way rather than conflict with each other and be done in perhaps a disjointed. It's challenging, interesting, and as always, full of political influence is probably the right word. So that's a bit about me.
Oh, thank you so much, Dorothy, and thank you for that correction about where you're working now, which is very important. I mean, it's really interesting then, you're both obviously in councils in the Northwest as well. So the Northwest is represented here. Kevin, let me just, because you mentioned your experience, you've worked in major cities, Coventry, Birmingham, obviously you're at Manchester at the moment. What do you feel are the main challenges and constraints of delivering these construction projects in those types of urban environments?
Yeah, it's it's the challenge. It's not one that I've sort of devised to take on, but it just they just seem to have come forward to me. But yeah, as you say, I've done some of the more rural stuff in the likes of Warwickshire as well. But yeah, I'd say there's sort of 3 top issues on the particular challenges of working in cities when it comes to design and construction. Anyway, first is, as you would imagine, the available space in terms of construction in particular. But so the available space. I'm largely talking about city centres here and some of those major city centres, but some of the local centres, particularly in Birmingham, are mini towns in themselves. So the available space when you're working in those environments for things like sort of compounds and storage for construction really does put a sort of greater emphasis on how you deal with those things. But also as well, because you're dealing with, and again, largely they are retail areas where you're having those confines and constraints. The look and feel of things while you're doing construction is very key as well. So again, those space constraints and the use of that space in those, say, high profile areas as well, very much in city centres is really key. So look and feel and trying to find space to actually carry out the construction. I think the other one that everybody who's worked on construction or design in big urban city centres will be I've called them complex underground constraints, and most people translate that into services, gas, water, electric services. The reality is, particularly when you get into some of these city centres, is this becomes as much around sort of underground railway tunnels, as well as sort of major infrastructure that's beyond services that sit beneath the ground that you're trying to work in. So very much very different to what you've got in, again, some of those rural examples I've got, but has a big impact on the design very often in terms of what's in the ground, and then also has a huge impact on things like budgets and timescales for delivery. So and while you're doing those things, there's always an issue about having to manage and monitor some of those assets while you're working in and around them. So yeah, the complex underground constraints are the other one. The final one I'd just say is about the common factor with all those, again, is the major pedestrian areas. So whilst on a lot of schemes that me and Dorothy and others have worked on in the past will be around managing traffic and making sure things keep moving, it will be about those city centres and major local centres. It's about a new level of understanding about managing pedestrians during construction, but also in the design as well. And more these days, that's then also translating into managing how we deal with cyclists as well through those areas. And I think the last thing I say about that, in those areas, it's about where you've got high levels of pedestrians and people overseeing the work that you're doing, the level of scrutiny on some of those works increases as well. Everybody's a clerk of works all of a sudden, and anybody who's worked in local authority knows that working outside their own town hall is the worst thing you can possibly do. So yeah, those are some of the challenges, but all of that and a lot of that comes down to an issue about communication engagement, which is absolutely key to making sure you overcome a lot of those things.
Okay, we'll definitely pick up on communications and engagement, and how you go about that. Dorothy, in terms of Liverpool at the moment, did you want to say something, Dorothy?
Well, I was just going to say, to add to what Kevin's just said there, the introduction of the National Underground Asset Register, I think, will make a huge difference over time. Obviously, they've got to build up their detail, but if it's all recorded effectively, then hopefully you avoid the previous situation of digging up the road, thinking you know what's there, to find out you don't. So I think that will make a big difference.
Thank you. And so with Liverpool at the moment, what are your key transport and highways projects and sort of initiatives planned there?
Right. Well, at the minute, we've got a highways improvement programme divided across the city, north, central and south, which is focusing on all of those, if you like, ordinary highway maintenance issues that should have been dealt with and haven't been. So it's generally just bringing the roads network up to standard, and making sure that you've got all the right features in terms of your crossings and all of your other elements, so that the road network is working effectively. So that's one big area. We've got some major projects around Liverpool Lime Street, on the Strand here in Liverpool, in an area called Rope Walks. And these are all multi-million-pound projects which are designed to upgrade and improve the environment. But I do agree with Kevin that I think now you can't just do this on your own. It needs to be a collaboration. It needs to have involvement of environmental, ecological people, so that you can start to design green spaces that accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, and all types of road users. And I think that's the big challenge, to try and accommodate all of those needs within a budget that isn't infinite, and within a reasonable timescale. So there are massive challenges, and we've got a what for us is quite a serious, it's about a £90 million capital programme to dispense, and finding the resources always, and finding the partners to work with, is sometimes quite difficult. So there are lots of challenges, not only with the design of the actual facility, but with all of the other interests that are there from your local residents and businesses, your local elected members, who all have an interest in what's happening. So it's a challenge to always keep the communication and the information where it needs to be, whilst people are working on the actual physical attribute of the road network.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a question, because we want to put questions to our panelists. So if you do have any questions, do pop them in the Ask Your Question box. Now, I've got a question which was actually put in this box in the last session, and unfortunately we couldn't get to it. So if it's something that you feel that you can comment on, no problem if you can't, Dorothy or Kevin, but let me just mention it, because apologies for not being able to do that in the previous session. This is from Vicky, and she says, why are green bridges to help join up nature not incorporated when roads are built, and will any be fitted retrospectively as per government policy? She also says, I expect you have all heard of induced demand. Why is the science around this being ignored? She says there's a lot of evidence out there that proves building new roads does not ease congestion. In fact, the contrary. Why is the science being ignored, and why are decisions made not based on science? So, you know, that's her perspective. I wonder if either of you have any thoughts on that. Dorothy?
It's a good question. I would say that fitting things retrospectively is not always the best approach, and therefore can cost more. So I worry about that. I think that this is possibly because in many areas, and this is not meant to be in any way disrespectful, but there is a traditional way of approaching things and a traditional way of putting a design together. And I think we're in a transition phase where we just haven't quite caught up with the latest and most progressive and imaginative and innovative thinking. And I think that we will get there, but we're transitioning. And I think lockdown and the pandemic highlighted so many of these green issues, and the fact that people want spaces to sit and relax, but within the city area rather than somewhere separate. So I think we will get there. I think it's a transition, and I think we're all trying to get on board with the latest and the most imaginative ideas, but we're not quite there yet.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dorothy. Kevin, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, first, just to say, completely agree with Dorothy's point on retrofitting anything on existing assets, particularly bridges and structural assets, really difficult. There's often heritage issues involved with a lot of the bridges that we're talking about as well. But just on the structure side of things, that can be difficult. Away from bridges, though, you know, I've seen schemes and put schemes in looking at green walls and green infrastructure within high areas of particulates, where we've got where we had issues in Birmingham in terms of the areas of exceedance on air quality, is looking at putting green infrastructure there, which might be as simple as looking at putting sort of planted walls on railings within central reservations. So not necessarily linking it to retrofitting of green bridges as such, but where you can get that in on there, so where you can provide that on the highway asset, you look to do so. I will say, and again, we don't do much, I think it's fair to say for myself or Dorothy, don't do much new road building anyway. As the question alludes to, that's probably not, for a while we haven't been in the world of sort of predict and provide in terms of, you know, adding additional capacity into the network. It's been looking to look to the other end of the telescope, reducing reliance on private car journeys. But I've worked on HS2 over the past, in my previous life, over the past 10 years or so. I know that a lot of the work that's been done there by the Shire counties in particular, where the line goes through from London to Birmingham. There has been a huge push there by the Shire counties to ensure that any overbridges or bridges over or under the network, road and rail network, they that they will be constructed with green bridge standards and infrastructure attached to them. So again, I know work is being done on that, but again, probably not something we have a day-to-day involvement in either Manchester or Liverpool.
All right, thank you so much for taking that question, and thank you for giving us that question as well. Let me go. We've got more questions coming in now. So there's a question here. It's actually a question, and someone else has added to it. The question is, how much engagement is there from Active Travel England during the design stages of major projects? And then a question for you, Dorothy, on that subject. What is Liverpool City Council's plan to catch up to Manchester in terms of active travel? Dorothy, do you want to take that?
Yes, indeed. Well, Liverpool has a very proactive strategy now for active travel. It fully recognises that it has slipped behind other cities, and it is actively, sorry for the use of that word, addressing that problem and incorporating of cycleways, segregated cycleways, so that people feel safe. There's a big drive here to get people out of their cars and into the city. Also having to work with the bus operators to make sure that they're supportive. So change very heavily in the next 2 or 3 years in terms of its active travel. In terms of consulting Active Travel England, I don't believe we do at all, but I think that would be something that we should introduce into our schedule to get their perspectives. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Kevin, do you consult with Active Travel England?
Yeah, so interesting discussion only yesterday with so I think the key role there and the key connection between Active Travel England and the authorities is certainly in our case, and will be the case in the West Midlands as well, is through the regional transport authority, so Transport for Greater Manchester in our case. So yeah, that liaison and connection is held at that level rather than through the local authorities as we stand at the moment. But again, a discussion only as fresh as yesterday in terms of where Active Travel England's involvement is in if you like, the devising and developing of certain active travel schemes, and not just for Manchester. And the reason why it's held at that level is because we've got 10 districts within the Greater Manchester area, and there's an assurance that just needs to be, whatever that involvement is, or whatever that engagement that at that level is consistent across all those authorities. Active travel is something as an agenda and as a funding stream as well, is being dealt with through TFGM in our case, and through other combined authorities. And so I think that's where that relationship holds, but very much of interest for us about what that looks like in terms of delivery of schemes, approval of projects and programs, about where Active Travel England fit into that as far as TFGM are concerned.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you for those questions. We've got about 6 minutes left, I think. So if there's anything you want to just get in as a question, I'll try and put those to Dorothy and Kevin in the time that's left. But Kevin, I asked Dorothy earlier what the priorities were for Liverpool City Council in terms of transport and highways projects. What are they for Manchester at the moment?
So I think, like Dorothy said, ours are largely led by some of those big growth agenda items. So again, Manchester, as with Liverpool, as with Birmingham, as with many of the big cities, have got a huge growth agenda. Manchester's is as ambitious and as large as any I've seen. There are a couple of those big ticket items: Victoria North, which is a huge regeneration project on the fringes of the city centre, which will look to build 20,000 houses in the next and residential properties in the next over the next decade or so, along with what it will bring in terms of green infrastructure. Again, another park. Manchester's got some fantastic parks already in what is again largely suburban areas, and the plans that we've got for Victoria North are just massive in developing that. So a lot of that will then translate into what the transport implications are for access and egress, and how that will impact on movement in the city centre as well. So an awful lot of work going on there that's associated with the growth agenda. I think probably the other one we can't miss out on, again, I mentioned it once already, but HS2, it's the next phase to Manchester, but that's that was being discussed at the Common Select Committee this week in terms of the station arrangements within the city centre, and come the autumn there'll be a separate Select Committee session on the transport implications of HS2 for the city more widely. So Hugh, that will bring with it, as it did when I was in Birmingham as well, a huge regeneration project with that as well, that will have massive implications for transport. I think with all those things, but with all the transport initiatives we got, as I said earlier, the focus for the city and for TFGM in terms of their role in delivering that is around that move to active travel. It is around meeting those high level objectives around sustainability, carbon reduction, clean air, and looking to provide all that against a background of growth and attracting people into the city that still leaves you with a viable and attractive means of travelling across it and travelling to the suburbs that doesn't involve private car use. And I think that's the challenge, and that's where the thrust of what we're doing is going. There's some emerging work going on on that point around what we call the radial routes within the city, which are those routes that come into the city core and meet up with the ring road. And that piece of work is then looking at how we reallocate road space on that basis, which is again another key part of this. Is it about bus priority? Is it around cycles? Is it around pedestrians? Is it around pairing some of these routes up that says one of those routes parallel to another one will be for buses, the other one will be more conducive towards cycling? All it's those big initiatives, but all led by the same aim, which is trying to find better ways of getting around the city and reduce our carbon emissions and improve the clean air of the city and make the city more accessible to people, particularly the city centres and some of those local centres on those radial routes as well. So that's the thrust of a sort of transport and highway strategy in Manchester for the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Kevin. And I can imagine you're someone with a very busy inbox, given the scale of what you're currently working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I'm used to it, so that's fine. That's good.
Dorothy, we've sort of touched upon this around the green agenda. I just wonder, from that kind of overview perspective, how will a green agenda change the design and construction landscape, do you think?
Well, I think it's very much, we're going to have to be more collaborative. It's not just about designing a road or a space for travel. It's about designing a whole system that incorporates ecology and looks after the environment as well and active travel people and pedestrians. So I think we're going to have to think wider in our designs and not just look at a pure A to B road network design. We're going to have to look at the greenness and the plantation and the trees and all of those things. So I think we need to have a broader input into our design conversations.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we're almost out of time, so I thought it would be great just to end with a brief reflection on what you're most excited about in terms of your remit at the moment, where you're working. Kevin?
Yeah, I think it does go back to that growth agenda piece as well. It is, the ability for cities or towns or wherever you are and wherever you're based to be able to develop and grow in, as we just said, and as Dorothy just said, in a sustainable way that is, that will deliver that growth that you need for the city and still make it a livable and, in our terms, an accessible city. That challenge, a little bit trying to talk about challenges in jobs, but that is one of the things that drives me. It's what drove me in Birmingham to stay there as long as I did. Is there was always a challenge up there, whether it was a big PFI, whether that was a Commonwealth Games, whether it was another transport initiative of moving something else. And very much the same here. As I say, Manchester's very similar in that regard. It's got the same ambition, it's got the same aspirations, and that's what really what drives you to come in, do the job, and excites you to get the work done.
Brilliant, thank you, Kevin. And Dorothy?
Pretty much the same. I'm excited to see how we develop the city to incorporate all the different elements of transport that we need to incorporate and how we bring that together effectively.